Via Rail. Via Rail Canada Inc., reporting mark VIA, generally shortened to Via Rail or VIA, styled corporately as VIA Rail Canada, is a Canadian Crown corporation that is mandated to operate intercity passenger rail service in Canada. It receives an annual subsidy from Transport Canada to offset the cost of operating services connecting remote communities. Via Rail operates over 500 trains per week across 8 Canadian provinces and 12,500 kilometres, 7,800 mi of track, 97% of which is owned and maintained by other railway companies, mostly by Canadian National Railway (CN). Via Rail carried approximately 4.39 million passengers in 2017, the majority along the corridor routes connecting the major cities of the Quebec City Windsor Corridor, and had an on-time performance of 73%. History. Background. Yearly passenger levels on Canada's passenger trains peaked at 60 million during World War II. Following the war, the growth of air travel and the personal automobile caused significant loss of mode share for Canada's passenger train operators. By the 1960s, it was obvious to both Canadian National Railway (CN) and the Canadian Pacific Railway (CP) that passenger trains were no longer economically viable. CP sought to divest itself of its passenger trains, but federal government regulators and politicians balked, forcing them to maintain a minimal service through the 1970s, with the government subsidizing up to 80% of losses. CN, being a Crown corporation at that time, was encouraged by the federal government and political interests to invest in passenger trains. Innovative marketing schemes such as red, white, and blue fares, new equipment such as scenic dome cars and rail diesel cars, and services such as Rapido and the UAC Turbo trains temporarily increased numbers of passengers, reversing previous declines. These increases proved temporary. By 1977, total passenger numbers had dropped below 5 million. The decline of passenger rail became a federal election issue in 1974 when the government of Pierre Trudeau promised to implement a nationwide carrier similar to Amtrak in the United States. Starting in 1976, CN began branding its passenger services with the bilingual name Via or Via CN. The Via logo began to appear on CN passenger locomotives and cars, while still carrying CN logos as well. That September, Via published a single timetable with information on both CN and CP trains, marking the first time that Canadians could find all major passenger trains in one publication. In 1977, CN underwent a dramatic restructuring when it placed various non-core freight railway activities into separate subsidiaries, such as ferries under CN Marine, and passenger trains under Via Rail, which was subsequently renamed Via Rail Canada. Formation and early years. On 12 January 1977, CN spun off its passenger services as a separate Crown corporation, Via Rail Canada. At its inception, Via acquired all CN passenger cars and locomotives. Following several months of negotiation, on 29 October 1978, passenger train services which were not included in the creation of Via Rail included those offered by BC Rail, Algoma Central Railway, Ontario Northland Railway, Quebec North Shore and Labrador Railway, various urban commuter train services operated by CN and CP, and remaining CN passenger services in Newfoundland. At this time, Via did not own any trackage and had to pay right-of-way fees to CN and CP. Via initially had a tremendous variety of equipment, much of it in need of replacement, and operated routes stretching from Sydney, Nova Scotia to Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and north to Churchill, Manitoba. Over 150 scheduled trains per week were in operation, including transcontinental services, regional trains, and corridor services. While Via remains an independent federal crown corporation mandated to operate as a business, it is hindered by the fact that it was created by an order in council of the Privy Council, and not from legislation passed by Parliament. Had Via been enabled by legislation, the company would be permitted to seek funding on the open money markets as other crown corporations such as CN have done in the past. It is largely for this reason that critics say Via, like Amtrak in the United States, is vulnerable to federal budget cuts and continues to answer first to its political masters, as opposed to the business decisions needed to ensure the viability of intercity passenger rail service. 1980s. Greater numbers of passengers would not be Via's savior. In 1981, Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau's government-endorsed Minister of Transport Jean-Luc Pepin's plan which slashed Via's budget, leading to a 40% reduction in the company's operations. Frequently sold-out trains such as the Supercontinental, which reduced Via to operating only one transcontinental train, the Canadian and the popular Atlantic, were discontinued. Via also sought to reduce its reliance on over 30-year-old second-hand equipment and placed a significant order with Bombardier Transportation for new high-speed locomotives and cars which would be used in its corridor trains. The LRC light, rapid, comfortable locomotives and cars used advanced technology such as active tilt to increase speed, but proved troublesome and took several years to work out problems. By 1990, only a handful of LRC locomotives remained in service, which were subsequently retired by the arrival of the GE Genesis locomotives in 2001. The election of Brian Mulroney's Progressive Conservative government in 1984 brought an initial friend to Via, when several of Mulroney's commitments included rescinding the Via cuts of 1981, by restoring the Supercontinental under pressure from his Western Caucasus, and the Atlantic under pressure from his Eastern Caucasus, and then St. John Mayor Elsie Wayne. Prime Minister Mulroney's government gave Via funding to refurbish some of its cars and purchase new locomotives, this time a more reliable model from General Motors' diesel division. It was during this time, on 8 February 1986, that Via's eastbound Supercontinental collided with a CN freight train near Hinton, Alberta, as a result of the freight train crew missing a signal light, resulting in 23 deaths. By the late 1980s, inflation and other rising costs were taking their toll on federal budgets, and in the Mulroney government's 1989 budget, Via again saw its budget slashed, surpassing even the 1981 cuts under Trudeau. 1990s. Minister of Transport Benoit Bouchard oversaw the reduction in service on 15 January 1990, when Via's operations were reduced by 55%. Services such as the Supercontinental were again discontinued, along with numerous disparate rural services such as in Nova Scotia's Annapolis Valley and Cape Breton Island, Western Canada, and in the corridor. The Canadian was also moved from its home rails on CP to the northerly CN route previously plied by the Supercontinental. The shift to the less populated and less scenic route between Toronto and Vancouver severed major western cities such as Regina and Calgary from the passenger rail network and flared western bitterness toward the Government of Canada. The official justification for the rerouting was that the trains would serve more remote communities, but the concentration of ridings held by the Progressive Conservatives along the CN route attracted the charge that the move was chiefly political. Harvey Andre, one of Alberta's federal cabinet ministers who represented Calgary, stated publicly that he did not care if he never saw a passenger train again in his life. The Mulroney cuts allowed VIA to consolidate its fleet of cars and locomotives, resulting in a fleet of refurbished stainless steel HEP-1 and HEP-2 rebuilds and LRC cars, as well as rationalizing its locomotive fleet with GM and Bombardier LRC units. VIA was not spared from further cutbacks. Jean Chrétien's Liberal government, elected in 1993. Minister of Finance Paul Martin's first budget in 1994 saw further VIA cuts, which saw the popular Atlantic dropped from the schedule, focusing the Eastern transcontinental service on the ocean. CP had sold off a large portion of track the Atlantic had operated on, and, as VIA at that time was only mandated to provide passenger services on tracks belonging to CN or CP, the route was discontinued. This move was seen as somewhat controversial and politically motivated, as the principal cities benefiting from the Atlantic's service were Sherbrooke, Quebec, and Saint John, New Brunswick, where the only two progressive Conservative Party members of Parliament in Canada were elected in the 1993 federal election, in which Chrétien's Liberal Party took power. The ocean service, which was preserved, currently operates on track between Montreal and Halifax, running through the lower St. Lawrence River Valley and northern New Brunswick. The Minister of Transport in Chrétien's government at the time, Douglas Young, was elected from a district that included Bathurst, New Brunswick, on the ocean's route. A remote VIA service to Quebec's Gaspe Peninsula, the Chaleur, was also spared from being cut at this time, despite carrying fewer passengers than the Atlantic. Renaissance funding. By the late 1990s, with a rail-friendly Minister of Transport, David Collinet, in office, there were modest funding increases to VIA. Corridor services were improved with new and faster trains, a weekly tourist train, the Bras d'Or, returned VIA service to Cape Breton Island for the first time since the 1990 cuts, and a commitment was made to continue operating on Vancouver Island, but Western Canada continued to languish with the only service provided by the Canadian and a few remote service trains in northern BC and Manitoba. In a significant new funding program dubbed Renaissance, a fleet of unused passenger cars which had been built for planned Night Star sleeper services between locations in the United Kingdom and continental Europe via the Channel Tunnel were purchased and adapted following the cancellation of the Night Star project. The new Renaissance cars were swiftly nicknamed to Plaisance displeasure by French-speaking employees and customers due to early problems adapting the equipment for Canadian use. Doors and toilets froze in cold Atlantic Canada temperatures, resulting in delays and service interruptions. New diesel-electric 42 DC locomotives purchased from General Electric (GE) allowed the withdrawal of older locomotives, including remaining LRC. LRC passenger cars were retained and continued to provide much of the corridor service. This expansion to VIA's fleet has permitted scheduling flexibility. Additionally, many passenger stations have been remodeled into passenger-friendly destinations, with several hosting co-located transit and regional bus hubs for various municipalities. 2000s. On 24 October 2003, Federal Minister of Transport David Collinet announced $700 million in new funding over the next 5 years. This funding was below the $3 billion needed to implement a high-speed rail proposal in the Quebec City Windsor Corridor nicknamed VIA Fast. However, the funding was intended to provide for faster, more frequent and more reliable passenger service across Canada, preserving the option for higher-speed rail, such as the VIA Fast proposal, said Collinet. This new project was to be called Renaissance Roman II. On 18 December 2003, Liberal Prime Minister PM Paul Martin announced a freeze in federal spending on all major capital projects, including VIA's 5-year $700 million Renaissance Roman II program announced just 6 weeks earlier by outgoing PM Crescen's administration. Critics of Martin's cuts claimed that he was in a distinct conflict of interest as his family through Canada Steamship Lines and various subsidiary and affiliated companies had once had a significant investment in the Voyageur Colonial Bus Lines, an intercity bus line in Quebec and Eastern Ontario that is a key competitor of VIA. Route cuts under the Martin government included the withdrawal of the seasonal Bras d'Or tourist train, which ran for the last time in September 2004, and the Montreal-Toronto overnight enterprise, which was discontinued in September 2005. The Sarnia-Chicago International was also discontinued in April 2004 by Amtrak. VIA's portion of the route from Toronto-Sarnia remained in operation as VIA was able to use their own equipment to operate the train. Sponsorship scandal. The Federal Auditor General's report released publicly on 10 February 2004 showed what appeared to be a criminal misdirection of government funds intended for advertising to key Quebec-based supporters of the Liberal Party of Canada. Included in the Auditor General's report was the fact that VIA was used as one of several federal government departments, agencies, and crown corporations to funnel these illicit funds. Forced to act on the Auditor General's report due to its political implications, Martin's government suspended VIA President Marc Lafrancois on 24 February 2004, giving him an ultimatum of several days to defend himself against allegations in the report or face further disciplinary action. Several days later, during Lafrancois' suspension, former VIA Marketing Department employee Myriam Bedard claimed she was fired several years earlier when she questioned company billing practices in dealing with advertising companies. According to CBC News, an arbitrator's report later concluded that Bedard had voluntarily left VIA. She was publicly belittled by VIA CEO Jean Pelletier in national media on 27 February 2004. Pelletier retracted his statements, but on 1 March, Pelletier was fired. By 5 March, after failing to defend himself adequately against the allegations in the Auditor General's report, Lafrancois was fired as well. Increasing problems and reinstated funding. The reversal of funding in 2003 led to a backlog of deferred maintenance and left VIA unable to replace or refurbish life-expired locomotives and rolling stock. Conversely, VIA ridership increased from 3.8 million in 2005 to 4.1 million in 2006. On 11 October 2007, Finance Minister Jim Flaherty announced federal government funding of $691.9 million over 5 years, of which $519 million for capital projects, and the remainder additional operating funding. The capital funding was earmarked to refurbish VIA's fleet of 54 F-40 PH2 locomotives to meet new emissions standards and extend their service lives by 15-20 years, refurbish the interiors of LRC coaches, reduce track capacity bottlenecks and speed restrictions in the Windsor Quebec City corridor, and make repairs to a number of stations across the network. This announcement was similar in content to the previous Renaissance Roman II package, and once again was criticized for not including new equipment or funding for services outside the Windsor-Quebec City corridor. Shortly afterwards, documents obtained by the Canadian press under the Access to Information Act revealed that delays due to equipment failures had risen by 60% since the previous year. The company attributed this to problems with the aging F-40 locomotive fleet. On 27 January 2009, the Government of Canada announced in its 2009 Economic Action Plan that it would increase funding to VIA by $407 million to support improvements including increased train frequencies and enhanced on-time performance and speed, particularly in the Montreal-Ottawa-Toronto corridor. On 21 July 2009, VIA announced its engineers would go on strike as of 24 July if no deal was reached by then, and began canceling all trains in anticipation of strike. The strike officially began at midnight on July 24 after it became clear that no deal had been reached. Engineers had been without a contract since 31 December 2006. Full service resumed on 27 July 2009. An additional strike by the Canadian Auto Workers CAW union, representing around 2,200 employees, was planned to begin on 4 July 2010, but was called off after the union and VIA reached a 3-year contract. 2010s. VIA experienced more service cuts at the dawn of the 2010. In March 2011, the daily Victoria Courtenay, the Malahat RDC service on Vancouver Island, was suspended indefinitely due to deteriorating track. It has yet to resume. By 27 June 2012, the Canadian was reduced from 3 days a week to 2 days a week beginning November 2012. Service operated at twice weekly November-April during and thrice weekly May-October until 2019. In 2019, only 2 trains per week operated on the full route, while the third train ran only between Vancouver and Edmonton once a week in each direction. The Ocean was reduced from 6 days a week to thrice weekly beginning October 2012. Corridor services west of Toronto were reduced, with weekend service reductions to Montreal and Ottawa, Ontario. Corridor services to Sarnia and the Niagara region were reduced to once daily in October 2012, with additional taking effect in July 2012. Sarnia was left with a single daily round trip. Niagara Falls lost all service except the joint Amtrak via daily New York City-Toronto Maple Leaf service, although Toronto regional commuter service was later provided by GO Transit. Corridor services to Kitchener, London, and Windsor were reduced starting in October 2012, with at least 2 daily round trips surviving. In September 2013, the GASP service, which had been bustituted in 2011, was suspended indefinitely. To address declining on-time performance due to freight train traffic on VIA routes, MP Olivia Chow drafted a private member's bill in 2014 that would reorganize the company and allow the government to force freight rail carriers to give scheduling priority to public passenger rail. However, as with most private members' bills, it was not passed. Service improvements. The Quebec-Windsor Corridor was the focus of service restorations and implements. A direct Ottawa-Quebec City train was restored, with additional trips between Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto being added. In 2016, LRC passenger cars used for the corridor were refurbished in the VIA 1 class. This included single seating. In March 2017, VIA announced the release of a new category of rail pass valid for the month of July 2017 corresponding to Canada's sesquicentennial celebrations for youth aged 18-25, costing $150, several $100 cheaper than a comparable rail pass would typically cost. A larger than expected response resulted in the temporary loss of functionality for VIA's website. Despite plans to cap the number of passes sold at 1867, the year of Canadian Confederation, over 4,000 passes were ultimately sold. The company received significant backlash as it initially appeared there was no limit on the number of passes available. 2018 present. Extreme winter conditions had always been an operational hazard for VIA, with the Ottawa routes and Canadian being most vulnerable. Equally, summer repairs and construction often delayed trains system-wide. However, by 2018, freight traffic on the heavily used CN lines had become a significant concern for maintaining on-time service. This issue arose due to typical siding sizes, which were not long enough to accommodate modern freight trains. Passenger trains were consequently placed on sidings whenever two trains passed rather than freights, which meant that passenger trains did not have priority on CN lines. The issue existed in all parts of the VIA network, although it became most extreme on the Canadian, where delays increased from an average of 5 hours to as much as 50 over the 4-day journey. VIA ultimately addressed the issue by eliminating its late policy on its cross-Canada trains but retaining it for the corridor routes. However, VIA continues to compensate inconvenienced guests with necessary hotel accommodations prior to the journey, as well as ensuring continued transportation where a connection to a second VIA train had been missed. As such, compensation costs were factored into VIA's 2018 budget. By the end of 2018, the full route time on the Canadian had been increased twice to absorb freight delays. The second extension to 5 days has been mostly successful in decreasing delays and also allowed for a daytime transit of Hell's Gate in BC, previously transversed overnight in the dark. The scheduled increased running time actually resulted in the Canadian arriving early on several occasions. However, Toronto-Vancouver service frequencies were reduced to only twice weekly during peak summer period, with a third Toronto-Edmonton run suspended entirely. On 12 December 2018, VIA announced that it had awarded a contract to Siemens Canada for 32 train sets to replace the entire Quebec City Windsor Corridor fleet. This marked the completion of a procurement process launched following the 2018 federal budget, which allocated funding for the fleet replacement. During the request for proposals stage, VIA had narrowed the potential suppliers down to Siemens, Bombardier, Talgo, and Stadler Rail. Siemens was ultimately selected after finishing first on the key criteria, which included the ability to deliver in a timely fashion, the quality of the product offering, and the price. The new fleet will consist of Siemens SC-44 locomotives, hauling a combination of coaches, business-class cars, and cab cars from the Siemens Venture series to allow bidirectional operation. The trains will be built at Siemens plant in Sacramento, California, and Siemens committed to including at least 20% Canadian content in the final product. The order includes an option for an additional 16 train sets to be exercised if the federal government approves VIA's high-frequency dedicated corridor project. The first train set is to be delivered for testing by winter 2021, with the first sets in service by 2022 and all trains in service by 2024. The delivery of the new trains will allow VIA to retire LRC and Renaissance equipment from the corridor and reallocate the HEP2 and corridor-based HEP-owned cars to other parts of the network. Budget and management. VIA is operated as an independent Crown corporation and receives a subsidy from the Minister of Transport to provide service to remote communities. VIA operates more than 500 trains per week from coast to coast. The sum of $369 million was earned from passenger revenues in 2018. Over 474 million passenger voyages were taken in 2018. An on-time ratio of 71% was achieved in that year. Over 3,115 persons were employed by VIA by the end of 2018. VIA President Yves Desjardins Siciliano stated that the subsidy for passenger rail travel in Canada in 2015 was about 200%. For every $1 travelers spend on fares, Canada pays $2 in subsidy. As of May 2019, the chair of the board of directors is Francois Bertrand, while the president and CEO is Cynthia Garneau. There are 11 other persons on the board of directors at the same year. The annual accounts of VIA are audited to GAAP principles by the Auditor General of Canada, under the Financial Administration Act. Via Rail Canada Inc., the corporation had $9,300,000 in share capital as of 2018. Via also received $394.4 million of government funding in 2018. In May 2019, Cynthia Garneau was appointed as the new CEO of Via. She replaced Yves Desjardins Siciliano, who completed his 5-year mandate on 8 May 2019. Expansion plans. Maritimes. Via has explored the introduction of daily regional service in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick connecting Halifax, Moncton, and Campbellton to complement the thrice-weekly ocean service to Montreal. As of 2017, Via's statement was that it was exploring an eastern intercity corridor service, and further developments were dependent on infrastructure upgrades and equipment testing. Via has also expressed interest in operating commuter rail service on CN tracks in Halifax that would run from the city's downtown station as far as Windsor Junction. However, in June 2019, Halifax Regional Council voted unanimously to direct staff not to pursue commuter rail service further, due to infrastructure requirements and associated financial implications, as well as operational considerations and restraints. High-Frequency Rail Project HFR. Via has developed a $4 billion high-frequency rail service plan as a response to delays faced by sharing tracks with freight trains. The plan opts for a dedicated track between Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City, offering more frequent trains, although running at conventional speeds. In Ontario, Via would run a new rail line on currently underused tracks from Toronto to Ottawa through Peterborough instead of Kingston. In Quebec, corridor trains would travel from Montreal to Quebec City through Trois-Rivières on the north shore of the St. Lawrence River rather than on the south shore through Drummondville. Via claims this would allow them to run more trains in the corridor, reduce trip times by 25% and improve on-time performance to over 95%. Feasibility studies have been funded by the federal government since the 2016 budget, and the 2018 budget allowed for the funding of the fleet replacement portion of the plan, though not the dedicated rail lines. Contrary to expectations, the 2019 federal budget did not include a final decision for new funds for HFR. However, in January 2020, Via announced the hiring of a joint venture of engineering firms Ecom and Arup to undertake a detailed engineering study of the proposal. Service suspensions. 2 former Via routes, the Malahat service ended in 2011 and Chalor service ended in 2013, are currently suspended due to poor track conditions. Via plans to reintroduce service once track upgrades have been completed. The Quebec government announced funds for repairs to Chalor trackage in 2017, with a completion date stated only as being several years away. No concrete plan to restore trackage along the Malahat has been announced as of 2020. The Winnipeg-Churchill train was disrupted by severe spring flooding on 23 May 2017, when the Hudson Bay Railway tracks were damaged beyond standard maintenance. Winnipeg-Gillam service continued. Omni Tracks, the original owner of the track, refused to make the repairs, saying that the track was no longer viable, despite the matching federal subsidy. The railroad was Churchill's only land link to southern Canada, and its loss resulted in significant cost of living increases for residents along the corridor. A stranded train was removed by ship in October 2017. Service to Churchill was restored in late 2018 after the tracks, Churchill Port and Churchill Marine Tank Farm, were purchased by Arctic Gateway Group. The federal government assisted in the purchase with $74 million of dedicated northern infrastructure money up front and an additional commitment of $43 million over 10 years. To restore passenger rail service before winter, Arctic Gateway repaired 29 washouts in 35 days. Although a special Via train arrived in Churchill on 1 November, the first regular Via train arrived in Churchill on 4 December, 560 days after service initially ceased. On February 13, 2020, following several days of blockades during the nationwide Coastal GasLink pipeline protests, Via Rail announced that it would be shutting down most of its passenger train service across Canada till further notice, with the exception of the Sudbury-White River train line and the Winnipeg-Churchill train between Churchill and the Pass. Later in 2020, in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, nearly all Via Rail trains were suspended with the exception of the Winnipeg-Churchill train as well as one train daily on each route within the corridor. Along with the previous protest-related service suspensions, it is the most extensive temporary reduction of service in Via Rail's history. Traveling on Via. Travel on Via varies by region as much as class. Many of Via's policies and protocols are the product of running a national train system with varying pressures and needs of different passengers, communities, and contexts. The results are wide-ranging travel experiences depending on the distance and location of the journey. Unscheduled stops. Some Via routes outside the corridor offer the option of unscheduled stops at places where there is no station. With 48 hours notice, a passenger can request to entrain or detrain at a specified milepost. This option is available on all of the adventure routes, as well as the Canadian between Capreol and Winnipeg. Classes of service. Escape fare. Discounted seats from economy class, with restrictions on refunds and exchanges. Economy class seating in coach cars. Passengers are usually assigned seats except trains 54, 97, 98, 650 and 651, where passengers are separated based on train cars according to destination. Snacks and beverages are sold by employees with service carts in a lounge car or in a restaurant car. Free Wi-Fi access is provided in the corridor and on the ocean. Business, formerly called Via 1, first-class seating available on most corridor trains in southern Quebec and Ontario. Business class offers passengers individually reserved seats, more spacious seating, window blinds, inclusive hot three-course meals complete with complimentary wine and liqueurs, in-seat AC power outlets, and free Wi-Fi access. Business class passengers are also granted priority boarding and access to business lounges at major urban stations. Touring, available on the Skeena only in peak travel months. Includes 3 meals per day, wine with supper, on-train commentary from the staff, and guaranteed access to the panoramic and park cars. Sleeper Plus, sleeping accommodations aboard overnight trains. This service class was formerly known as Sleeper in some cases, including on the now suspended Chaleur. Available on the Canadian, Ocean and Winnipeg-Churchill trains. Options for this class on the Canadian include berth sections and single, double and triple bedrooms with bunk beds and electrical outlets. On other trains, not all options are available. Also included are first-class meals in the dining car not including alcohol, and access to the Skyline car and viewing salons in the glass-domed park car, when available. Passengers are also given priority boarding and access to the panorama lounges at major urban stations. Each car has access to a washroom and, optionally, a shower. Access to business lounges where available or the Sleeper Plus lounge in Halifax is available on departure day. Prestige, Via's latest premium service offering available on the Canadian only. In addition to the Sleeper Plus amenities, includes modernized luxurious sleeping accommodations at the rear of the train, priority reservations in the dining car, a concierge, complimentary beverages including alcohol and schedule permitting, a free tour of select Winnipeg attractions. Access to business lounges is provided on both arrival and departure days in Toronto and Vancouver. On board. Amenities. Smoking is prohibited on all Via trains. Smoking tobacco has been banned on the corridor routes since 1993, and this policy was gradually extended to all trains, while smoking cannabis was banned on all Via routes on the same day it was made legal in Canada. The last remaining on-board smoking was permitted in a smoker's lounge on some long-distance routes, only at certain times of day, until 2002. Washrooms are provided for each car. On sleeper cars, every private room has its own separate washroom. Food service varies by train. All trains save the Sudbury White River train offer snacks, light meals, and both alcoholic and non-alcoholic beverages for purchase. Long-distance trains offer traditional sit-down dining and full meals to sleeper class passengers. Economy class passengers can purchase hot takeout meals prepared in the dining car on long-distance trains during the peak season and eat in the sit-down dining car in the off-peak. Complimentary Wi-Fi service is available in the corridor. The present Wi-Fi system is provided by 21net since November 2008. Previously, the Wi-Fi service was provided by Parsons commencing in February 2006. Via had upgraded the past Wi-Fi system during 2011 with technology provided by Nomad Digital. Via was the first North American transportation service to offer Wi-Fi to its passengers in early 2006 and was one of the first in the world to do so. Wi-Fi is also available to travelers in all classes of service who may benefit from complimentary Wi-Fi service in many Quebec City Windsor Corridor stations. Wi-Fi service has been added to the Ocean train in the service cars and to the Canadian, although connections are unreliable in most places outside urban centers. Luggage. Via offers checked luggage on its longer haul services. However, in the corridor only certain trains have luggage cars. In older class cars, there is sufficient space at the front of the car for luggage storage. In contrast, the Renaissance stock has enough space underneath the seat for only one small piece of carry-on luggage. The remainder must be checked. Accessibility and safety concerns. Via offers pre-boarding assistance to those passengers requiring extra time to board its trains. Not all stations are equally accessible. All Via trains are capable of accommodating wheelchairs, although capacity is limited. Routes and connections. Via operates in the provinces of Alberta, British Columbia, Manitoba, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Ontario, Quebec, and Saskatchewan. The only province or territory connected to the Continental Railway network and not served by Via is the Northwest Territories. Newfoundland and Labrador, Nunavut, Prince Edward Island, and Yukon have no rail connections to the Continental network and thus no Via service. Via operates over 475 trains per week over 19 routes marketed in 4 broad categories: Ontario and Quebec/corridor service, comprising frequent regional and local trains between major cities in a band from southwestern Ontario to Quebec City. The vast majority of Via's trains, over 400 per week, operate here. Cities served by corridor trains include Windsor, Sarnia, London, Toronto, Kingston, Ottawa, Montreal, and Quebec City. In 2017, corridor service accounted for 95% of Via's ridership and 77% of its revenue. The Maritime Way/Ocean, providing long-distance service between Quebec and the Maritime provinces. In 2017, the Ocean accounted for 2% of Via's ridership and 3% of its revenue. The Great Western Way/Canadian, providing both long-distance service between southern Ontario and western Canada, as well as essential rail services through northern Ontario. In 2017, the Canadian accounted for 2% of Via's ridership and 20% of its revenue. Adventure routes, 5 regional and long-distance routes that offer essential rail transportation in rural northern areas. In 2017, these routes in aggregate accounted for 1% of Via's ridership and revenue. The routes included in this category are Jasper Prince Rupert train former name, Skeena, Alberta, and British Columbia. Montreal Jonquière train former name, Saguenay, Quebec. Montreal Seneterra train former name, Abitibi, Quebec. Sudbury White River train former name, Lake Superior, Ontario. Winnipeg Churchill train former name, Hudson Bay, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Unlike Amtrak, which gives every route a specific name, most Via trains are identified only by their route number and destination. The only named Via trains are the Canadian and the Ocean. The 5 adventure routes were previously branded as the Skeena, the Saguenay, the Abitibi, the Lake Superior, and the Hudson Bay, respectively, and may still be referred to by these names in local usage. Track ownership. As of 2017, the mileage makeup of Via's route network by track owner/host railway was as follows. In total, about 88% of Via trackage is owned by a Class I railroad, 8% by a short-line railroad, and 5% by a government agency. Connections. The Maple Leaf, operating between New York City and Toronto via Albany, Buffalo, and Niagara Falls, is jointly managed by Via and Amtrak. The train operates using Amtrak equipment, but on the Canadian side of the border is staffed by Via employees and operated as a typical Via train. 2 other train routes link Canada and the U.S., the Adirondack Montreal, New York, and the Amtrak Cascades Vancouver, Seattle, Portland. While both of these routes share stations with Via at their Canadian termini, they are fully operated by Amtrak, and single-ticket connections to Via trains are not offered. In addition to Amtrak, Via passengers can book connecting tickets on the following services. Go Transit Toronto Regional Commuter Trains. Train to Charlevoix Summer Tourist Train between Quebec City and the Charlevoix region. No shared station in Quebec City. Bus shuttle available. Union Pearson Express Airport Rail link from downtown Toronto to Toronto Pearson International Airport. Maritime bus coach operator in Eastern Canada. Robert Q. Airbus transportation to and from Toronto Pearson International Airport and Detroit Metro Airport, several locations in southern Ontario. BC Ferries Connector offers service between downtown Vancouver and downtown Victoria. Réseau de Transports de la Capitale Public Transit in the Quebec City area. Red Arrow Coach operator in Alberta. Ontario Coachway provides transportation to and from Toronto Pearson International Airport. RegIM Public Transit in Gaspésie, Les Isles. Via also has connection agreements with several local and intercity bus operators, car-sharing services, and airlines. Passengers who are flying with these airlines can combine their air and rail trips under the same record locator. Rolling stock. Via owns 73 locomotives and 501 passenger cars. Examples include the GMD F40 PH2 diesel locomotive and the famed Park-class sleeper dome lounge cars found on the rear of the Canadian Jasper Prince Rupert train and the Ocean between Montreal QC and Halifax NS. Carbon emissions. In 2010, Via's carbon dioxide CO2 equivalent emissions per passenger kilometer were 0.117 kg. For comparison, this is similar to Amtrak or a car with 2 people, about twice as high as the UK rail average, about 4 times the average US motor coach, and about 8 times a Finnish electric intercity train or fully loaded 50-seat coach. Accidents and incidents. The most serious Via accident to date occurred on 8 February 1986, when a Via train collided with a CN freight train near Hinton, Alberta, killing 23 people and injuring 71. On 20 November 1994, at approximately 18:20, Via train No. 66 traveling eastward at approximately 96 mph, 7 of the CN North America Kingston subdivision in Brighton, Ontario. A fire erupted, and the trailing portion of the locomotive and the first 2 passenger cars behind the locomotive became engulfed in flames. 46 of the 385 passengers were injured, most while exiting the train in life-threatening conditions. 2 local residents were charged and convicted after an investigation by the local police. On 3 September 1997, Canadian train No. 2 from Vancouver to Toronto, traveling eastward at 67 mph, derailed at mile 7. 5 of the CN Wainwright subdivision near Biggar, Saskatchewan. 13 of 19 cars and the 2 locomotives derailed. 79 of the 198 passengers and crew on board were injured, 1 fatally and 13 seriously. Approximately 600 feet of main track was destroyed. The cause was determined to be an axle bearing failure, which was detected but erroneously ignored. Via was heavily criticized for a lack of attention to safety. On 23 April 1999, Via train No. 74 traveling eastward at mile 46. 7 on the CN Chatham subdivision in Thamesville, Ontario derailed after a switch was left open by a CN worker, causing the train to jump the tracks and collide with stationary hoppers on the adjacent track, derailing the locomotive and its 4 passenger cars. The 2 engineers were killed and 77 of the 186 passengers injured, 4 seriously. Approximately 50 m of the main track and 100 m of the yard track were destroyed. On 12 April 2001, the ocean-bound for Montreal derailed in Stewiacke, Nova Scotia, at a manually operated main track switch. A standard CN switch lock used to secure the switch in correct position had been tampered with. The 2 locomotives and the first 2 cars continued on the main track. 9 of the cars derailed and a farm supply building, as well as the industrial track, were destroyed. 4 occupants of the building escaped without injury prior to impact. There were 132 persons on board the train. 22 persons were transported to hospital in either Truro or Halifax. 9 were seriously injured. A 15-year-old boy pleaded guilty to the charge of mischief endangering life relating to the lock tampering. On 26 February 2012, 92 en route to Toronto derailed in Burlington, Ontario, killing all 3 railroad engineers and injuring 46, 3 seriously. The cause of the derailment is attributed to the excessive speed of the train traveling through a switch from Track 2 to Track 3. 2013 Via Rail Canada terrorism plot. In April 2013, 2 men inspired by Al-Qaeda were charged with plotting to derail a Via train in the Greater Toronto area. In 2015, both men were convicted of terrorism-related offenses and sentenced to life imprisonment. One of the 2 men was mentally unstable and misdiagnosed with schizophrenia. On 18 September 2013, a collision occurred between train No. 51 and a double-decker OC Transpo bus that failed to stop at a level crossing in Ottawa, Ontario. 6 people were killed and 31 injured, 11 critically, all of whom were on the bus. The impact resulted in the train derailing approximately 200 feet 61 m down the track. On 5 July 2018, a train with 16 passengers and 5 crew members derailed north of Hudson Bay, Iskay, while traveling from Winnipeg to Churchill. Passengers and crew sustained only minor injuries, but it took several hours for emergency crews to arrive due to the remote location of the incident. Paramedics and firefighters had to wait near the tracks for CN Rail trucks to arrive that could transport them to the crash site. On 31 December 2019, a train with 5 crew and 7 passengers derailed and tipped on its side near Catrine, Manitoba. The incident is still under investigation, and no one was seriously injured.